Level 1. The Split. You're sitting in a hotel restaurant in Istanbul when you make the decision that will define the rest of your life. You're an intelligence officer for a foreign service. Russian GRU, Iranian MOIS, one of the services that recruit people to operate in the dark and call it patriotism. You've been doing this for 8 years. Good pay, diplomatic cover, a career path that looked stable from the outside. But something changed. Maybe it was the dissident your service helped disappear in Berlin. Maybe it was realizing your own handler had been lying to you for years about what your operations were really for. Maybe it was just the slow accumulation of compromises that finally made loyalty feel indistinguishable from surrender. You open your phone and message a contact you were never supposed to use. British SIS, a man you met 2 years ago during a joint security forum in Geneva. You don't encrypt the first message. You're past caring about procedure for this. You need to do it before you convince yourself not to. The next evening, you walk into a crowded bar near Taksim Square and tell the bartender you're waiting for the export consultant from London. That's the phrase. Anyone who works long enough in intelligence learns to hear these things for what they are. 15 minutes later, you're sitting across from a woman who introduces herself as a trade officer, but is obviously not there to discuss exports. She's older than you expected, maybe mid, 40s, wearing a gray jacket that makes her look forgettable until you notice how carefully forgettable it is. She orders tea. You do the same. Her name is Eleanor. You don't learn that until much later. Officers in her position don't offer real names in first meetings. She just asks why you reached out. You tell her you want out. She doesn't react, doesn't show relief or suspicion or moral outrage, just studies your face and asks what exactly you mean by out. You lay it out. Your service, your access, the liaison channels you monitor, the operations you've supported, and then you tell her the part that matters. You already work with someone else. 3 years ago, your service sent you to recruit a businessman in Dubai who was secretly providing access to an American intelligence cutout. You reported him. Instead of shutting the channel down, your superiors told you to keep it alive, feed selective truths, build trust, penetrate the Americans through him. So you did. And over time, the Americans began tasking you directly through that channel without knowing who you really were. For 3 years, you've been a double agent without choosing it. Loyal to your service on paper, valuable to the Americans in practice. But now, you're here because you want something different. You don't want to just deceive one side for the benefit of the other. You want to turn both channels into leverage and work for a third side entirely. Eleanor considers this. She excuses herself for 10 minutes. When she returns, she has a different proposition. Don't burn either relationship. Keep both. Work for us above them. You'll be a triple agent, feeding your service, misleading the Americans, and quietly reporting both of them to the British while maintaining cover with everyone involved. It's more dangerous than being a double agent. Infinitely more dangerous. If you're exposed by one side, you might still bargain with the other. If you're exposed by all three, there is no bargain left. You'll be disappeared by whichever service reaches you first. Your family will be targeted too. Your brother runs a shipping business in Mersin. Your mother still lives in the apartment you grew up in. Any one of the 3 services could reach them faster than you could, but the payoff is different. You can protect them with time. You can build insurance with all sides before any one of them decides to cut you loose. And you can stop operations that no single service should be allowed to run unchecked. You agree. Not because you're fearless, because every other version of your life now feels like a delayed execution. They give you a communication protocol, face-to-face brush passes in airports, encrypted drafts hidden in inactive email accounts, emergency phrases planted in financial newsletters no one would ever read unless they were told to. You memorize everything. Nothing gets written down. You fly back to your station 2 days later. Eleanor told you to act completely normal. Don't become cleaner, don't become sloppier, don't become ambitious all at once. Just be exactly who you've been for years, except now you're lying to everyone with purpose. Your first reporting package to the British is carefully limited. Tasking summaries from the Americans, internal assessments from your home service, and the discrepancies between what each side believes the other side knows. Nothing explosive enough to trigger an immediate collapse, but enough to prove you're real and enough to prove your position is uniquely useful. A week later, you get confirmation through your covert channel. The reporting is excellent. They want more, so you give them more. Over the next 9 months, you become one of the most valuable, unofficial penetrations in the Eastern Mediterranean. You tell the British which American requests are genuine and which are bait. You tell them which operations your own service is using to manipulate U.S. collection priorities. You identify a sanctions evasion network that both sides thought they partially understood and reveal that neither of them actually had the full picture. Money appears in a layered account structure in Singapore. You don't touch it. It's not wealth yet. It's contingency. But you're not doing this for money. You're doing it because you've chosen to stand outside the logic of all three sides. And now there's no going back. Level 2. The 3 faces. You wake up every morning and put on whichever face the day requires. Loyal officer, productive American asset, plausible British observer. At work, you sit through briefings about hostile influence operations. Some of those operations are things you've already described to London in exhausting detail. You sit there taking notes, answering questions, volunteering small insights while knowing that half the room is speaking into a maze you've already mapped for someone else. The cognitive dissonance is extraordinary. You're deceiving people who think they own you. Your service believes you are penetrating the Americans. The Americans believe you've drifted morally and are giving them access out of conscience. The British believe you're trying to contain both sides through them. In moments of brutal honesty, you aren't completely sure any of them are wrong. Some days you tell yourself the only real loyalty left is to damage reduction. Some days that sounds noble. Some days it sounds like a coward's way of refusing to admit you've become addicted to operating without allegiance. You spend 4 years like this. 4 years of redirecting tasking, laundering motives, and memorizing who is lying to whom in conversations where every sentence has 3 possible meanings. 4 years of keeping separate ledgers in your head for 3 different realities. The stress manifests physically. You grind your teeth in your sleep until one of your molars cracks. Your hands shake when you unlock your phone in the morning. You start getting migraines during meetings and have to stare at a projector screen while nausea rolls through you in waves. But you can't go to a clinic too often because the paperwork creates patterns. You can't ask for leave because absences invite scrutiny. So you keep painkillers in your briefcase, stand in bathroom stalls waiting for your vision to stabilize, and tell yourself, this is temporary. Your relationship collapses quietly. The woman you've been seeing for 2 years knows you are never fully present. You're affectionate, then remote. Calm, then unreachable. Once, when she asks where you were the night before, you answer too fast and with too much detail. She thinks you're seeing someone else. You almost wish that were true. It would at least belong to normal life. Eleanor communicates with you through rotating channels. The Americans still use the old access path through Dubai. Your home service meets you in person when they want reassurance that their operation against the Americans remains healthy. You rarely get a day where only one side is asking something from you. The risk is too high, and the contradictions are accumulating. But once during a conference in Athens, Eleanor walks past your breakfast table, drops a newspaper beside your coffee, and says without looking at you that you're starting to sound tired in your reporting. Later that night, she sits beside you in a taxi line like a stranger waiting out the rain and asks how long you think you can keep this up. You tell her you're fine. She nods like she knows that's not even close to true. She says the reason they trust you is because you still sound like someone who feels the weight of what he's doing. That, if that disappears, you'll become dangerous in a different way. You hold on to that. Some nights, it's the only thing that keeps this from turning into a game. The British want more. They always want more. Confirmation of American source validation procedures, internal political fractures inside your own service, details about a covert logistics corridor everyone denies exists. Each request pushes you further into territory where contradiction becomes harder to manage. You're giving slightly different explanations to different people now. You're staying late to reconcile tasking conflicts. You're checking your secure devices in the wrong order because you're tired. One of your supervisors notices and asks if you're sleeping badly. You laugh it off. Too much coffee, too many flights, too much bureaucracy. He accepts it, but not casually. You see the small pause behind his eyes, the instant where concern becomes assessment. You file the interaction away as a warning sign. Level 3. The convergence. The collapse begins with timing. Your home service notices that several operations aimed at shaping American collection behavior are producing useful effects, but also strangely precise British diplomatic countermeasures. The Americans notice that a series of your most valuable leads arrive just before your service changes internal compartmentation. And the British notice that one of the reports you gave them contains a phrasing pattern that appears verbatim in a U.S. counterintelligence memo they should never have seen. None of them know the whole picture, but all three of them know part of it. And in intelligence, partial knowledge is often more dangerous than certainty because it makes everyone keep digging. Your service opens an internal review. The Americans send a new case officer into the Dubai channel and start changing validation questions. The British tighten your communications and ask for a full chronology of every side contact you've had in the last 18 months. Everyone with access to the relevant operations becomes a possible point of compromise. That includes you from every direction. The interrogations are called performance assessments on one side, security clarifications on another, routine channel maintenance on the third. Different language, same function. You sit across from professionals who have spent decades listening for hesitation. They ask about your travel, your contact chains, your recollection of old meetings, your reasoning behind minor reporting discrepancies that would have passed unnoticed a year earlier. You've been trained for this. You know how to survive one hostile interview. The problem is that you're now surviving 3, and each lie you tell one side has to survive contact with the truth you've already given another. They start surveillance in layers. You spot it because all 3 services use different styles, and you've seen enough of each to recognize the signatures. The sedan that appears near your apartment only on days you message the Americans. The unfamiliar technical crew rewiring an office floor no one asked to be rewired. The British request that feels like a report but reads like a test. You warn Eleanor through the emergency channel. She tells you to act natural. Don't cut contact with anyone. Don't try to get ahead of the suspicion. In a situation like this, sudden purity is its own confession. So, you continue the performance. You go to the office. You answer your channel. You return calls. You live inside overlapping circles of observation while pretending not to feel them closing. 2 people go down before you do. An American intermediary in Dubai disappears from contact after a compromise review. 1 officer in your own service is reassigned, then quietly detained. Both had touched parts of the machinery you were moving through. Both knew enough to be dangerous and not enough to save themselves. Then you attend a closed internal briefing that changes everything. The deputy director explains how hostile penetrations evolve when multiple services accidentally begin using the same human infrastructure. He describes the signs, the behavioral drift, the logic errors, the reporting asymmetries. Several of the indicators match decisions you've made in the last year. You realize the geometry is collapsing. Eleanor activates the extraction protocol. They've had a version of it prepared for months. A maritime security conference in Naples. You'll arrive under your current identity, attend one panel, then vanish between venues. A motorbike will take you to a ferry transfer. New documents, new route, temporary holding site in Malta. Your family can be moved later under commercial cover if you make it out clean. Everything is arranged. You just have to make it to Naples. Level 4. The break line. 3 days before your departure, your service calls you in. The office is the same. The atmosphere isn't. Different interviewer this time, more senior, more patient, the kind of patient that usually means they already know enough not to rush. He doesn't ask many questions. He tells you there are inconsistencies. Not one inconsistency, a pattern of them. Some tied to your reporting, some tied to your travel. Some tied to a foreign commercial contact in Dubai, who no longer exists on paper in the way he used to. They have access logs that don't fit your role. They have timeline overlaps they want explained. They have a financial anomaly involving a shell structure in Singapore that they can't fully attribute but don't like. He gives you a choice. Cooperate now. Explain the American channel. Explain any third country contact before someone else names it for you. Do that, and maybe this can still become a counterintelligence success instead of a public treason case. Refuse, and they'll move formally. You have until morning. You leave the building knowing the clock has already run out. You reach Eleanor through the emergency signal. The extraction moves up to tonight. You call your brother and tell him to leave his office early, take cash, and drive south without using the highway. You don't explain much. Just enough for him to hear the part of your voice that means this is real. He asks if your mother should come. She refuses. She thinks whatever trouble you're in can still be handled through the right people, the right favors, the old assumptions about how the state protects its own. There isn't time to argue her out of a lifetime of believing that. The rendezvous point is an underground parking structure near the waterfront. Eleanor isn't there. A local cutout is driving. He says almost nothing as the city slides by in pieces you've known since childhood. The bakery near your school, the tram stop where you used to wait with your father, the government building where you took your oath, places you'll never see again if this works, places you'll never see again if it doesn't. At the airport, you don't check in for the Naples flight. You go to the service entrance beside cargo handling and present documents identifying you as part of a private aviation maintenance team. The guard scans the badge, studies your face, asks one question you weren't told he'd ask, and glances toward his phone. You're certain he sees it. Certain one more second will undo the entire plan. Then he hands the badge back and waves you through. 20 minutes later, you're in the back of a van, heading toward the coast instead of the runway. 4 hours later, you're on a boat in open water with a passport that says you were born in Cyprus. Your mother is still in her apartment. Your brother is somewhere on the highway, maybe moving, maybe stopped. The Americans will open the Dubai channel tomorrow and discover the silence. Your service will search your office and start pulling every thread connected to you. The British will call this a successful extraction if you survive long enough to be processed. You've burned your old life in 3 directions at once. Everything you were to everyone is gone. What you have now is motion, contingency, and the knowledge that every service you touched has a reason to hate you. Some deceptions outgrow the people who create them. Some choices fracture your life beyond repair. Level 5. The instrument. They keep you first in Malta, then in a secure flat outside London. No official welcome. No dramatic debrief room with flags and statements about courage, just a furnished apartment, blackout curtains, 2 phones, and people who knock softly before asking you to reconstruct your life in 12-hour segments. Your brother makes it out 5 days later through a commercial route the British had prepared for emergencies. Your mother never comes. She stops answering unfamiliar numbers, then known numbers, then all numbers. Eleanor runs your debriefings for the first 6 weeks. Every operation your service ran through you, every American request, every distortion you introduced, Every moment you suspected that one side had begun testing the others through you, she asks about it, with the same controlled patience she had in Istanbul. After one session where you spend an entire afternoon explaining how you manipulated source validation on both sides without ever fully controlling the consequences, she walks you to the kitchen and tells you to eat something before you keep talking. You realize you haven't noticed hunger in hours. The debriefings intensify before they soften. Other teams come in, financial analysts, regional experts, counterintelligence psychologists, liaison officers who care less about your conscience than your recall accuracy. That's how this works. Once the immediate value is extracted, the people who understand the human story rotate out and the machinery takes over. Eleanor lasts longer than most. On her last day with the case, she stops by the flat carrying a file she doesn't open. She shakes your hand and says, "You manage complexity better than most ever do." You ask what happens to the ones who don't. She says usually they start believing one of their own cover stories. Then, they make a mistake they can no longer even recognize as a mistake. She leaves. You watch her car disappear into a London street so ordinary it feels insulting. What you feel isn't grief exactly. It's closer to the loneliness of losing the only witness who understood how all three versions of you once fit inside the same body. Your mother dies 18 months later. Stroke. You learn about it through a delayed message passed through a relative who isn't sure whether speaking to you is dangerous or disloyal or both. She never forgave you. Maybe she never understood enough to decide whether forgiveness was even relevant. Your brother makes contact eventually, but not to reconnect. He wants practical things, documents, money, help relocating debts and untangling the remains of a business that collapsed once your name became the kind people stopped saying out loud. He asks why you did it. You try to explain the crossed channels, the operations no one side should have controlled, the moment when serving one flag honestly became impossible because every flag was already using the other's lies as fuel. He listens. Then he tells you his life has been demolition by paperwork. Banks freezing lines of credit, contracts evaporating, interviews with men who were polite enough to call them interviews. He says he defended you at first because he thought maybe there had to be a reason large enough to justify the ruin. Now he knows the reason, and it still sounds like strategy more than morality. He leaves before the tea arrives. You never hear from him again. Level 6. The remainder. 17 years pass. You live in a house on the edge of Surrey under a name that feels legally accurate and emotionally empty. The pension attached to your cooperation keeps you comfortable. You have medical coverage, periodic security reviews, and a protocol for reporting foreign contact, even though at this point foreign contact would mostly mean ghosts. Threatened by what, exactly? The Americans know where you are in the way services always know. Your original service almost certainly does too. If they had decided you were worth killing, you would have disappeared years ago between train stations, or after a dental appointment, or on a wet road where the report would have called it poor visibility. The fact that you're alive doesn't feel like victory, it feels like arithmetic. Too expensive to touch, too old to matter, or maybe just not urgent yet. You hear through a retired liaison officer that Eleanor left SIS 8 years ago, teaching now somewhere near Edinburgh. 2 children, 1 divorce, a garden she apparently takes too seriously. Normal life, the kind that accumulates in seasons instead of operations. You think about writing to her sometimes. You never do. There's nothing to say that wouldn't sound either sentimental or accusatory, and she earned neither. You've become a marginal note in 3 different bureaucracies. Occasionally, a historian or journalist asks for a conversation about the era when overlapping intelligence wars in the region produced strange human intermediaries. Nobody fully controlled. You always decline. What would you say? That betrayal feels different in method, but not in residue. That the certainty you had in that hotel restaurant in Istanbul dissolved long ago into something murkier and far less flattering. The truth is, you're not sure you made the right choice. Some days you think you did. Information you provided, exposed sanctions networks, prevented manipulated crises, and stopped at least one operation that might have ended with civilians dead in a port. No newspaper would have connected back to the services involved. Other days you think about your mother dying without seeing you again, about your brother measuring the collapse of his life in contracts, audits, and frightened silences, about officers and case handlers across 3 services who trusted the version of you they were allowed to see and built careers or prison sentences or graves on that trust. The moral calculus doesn't balance. It never does. They tell you in training that a double agent lives between 2 worlds. What no one tells you about being a triple agent is that eventually the number stops mattering. 2 worlds, 3 worlds, 4. In the end, you belong to none of them. You're not loyal to the country that trained you. You're not loyal to the service that paid you. You're not loyal even to the third side that extracted you, because what they rescued was useful before it was human. You're something else now. A remainder, a person who chose leverage over belonging and discovered that leverage keeps you alive, but doesn't tell you who you are. When younger officers occasionally come to interview you for training, they ask whether operating at that level was worth it. You tell them yes, because institutions need clean lessons and survivable myths. But honestly, you don't know. The person who sat down in Istanbul and decided to split his life 3 ways doesn't exist anymore. That person had certainty, momentum, and the arrogance to think he could manage every consequence if he stayed intelligent enough for long enough. What you have now is caution, regret, and the understanding that some choices don't just change your life. They divide it into versions that never fully reconcile. You did what you thought was necessary. You paid for it. People around you paid for it in ways they never chose. And now you live with the residue in a quiet English county, waiting for nothing in particular and still never fully relaxing when headlights slow outside the house after dark. This is what it means to live as a triple agent. Not the glamour of perfect deception, just the long administrative, emotional, and moral aftermath of surviving your own decisions. The rest of your life spent wondering whether mastering every side was ever worth losing a place on any of them.